Hi, Sarah. How you doing?
Hi. Thank you for having me. Yes. Hi, how are you?
Let me introduce us. I'm Josh Summers. I'm a Boston-based yoga and meditation teacher, and you are Dr. Sara Lazar, associate researcher in psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital, also associate professor of psychology at Harvard Medical School.
Right.
And you've been involved in a lot of research and writing showing the kind of brain changes that occur due to practices like meditation and yoga.
hmm
And in fact, if anyone's been paying attention to the news, they'll see articles that talk about how meditation changes the brain. Your name is often listed or your picture's there. And you could say that your research in some ways, and I say this tongue in cheek a little bit, but your research is offering scientific credibility to what the New York Times recently in an op-ed referred to as the multi-billion-dollar spiritual industrial complex.
Yeah.
Did you see this article?
I've seen other ones like it, but yeah, no, definitely. Is this the one about Headspace?
It didn't mention Headspace, no.
Okay, yeah, no, there's a
Headspace,
new one on Headspace, yeah.
this was more criticizing the usage of being in the moment as sort of
Right,
as a panacea to all problems.
right.
And actually, there was the concluding paragraph. I thought I'd read it just to let you respond, because I think this gets into the heart of what you're doing. The author, Ruth, what was her name? Ruth Whitman says, in reality, despite many grand claims, the scientific evidence in favor of the moments being the key to contentment is surprisingly weak. When the United States Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality conducted an enormous meta-analysis of over 18,000 separate studies on meditation and mindfulness techniques, the results were underwhelming at best, she said. Although some of the studies did show that mindfulness meditation or other similar exercises might bring some small benefits to people in comparison with doing nothing, when they are compared with pretty much any general relaxation technique at all, including exercise, muscle relaxation, listening to spiritual audio tapes, or indeed any control condition that gives equal time and attention to the person, they perform no better and in many cases worse. So I'll give you
Yeah,
a few minutes to eviscerate that claim.
well, I wouldn't say eviscerate, but yeah, yes. I mean, so in that study, it was a meta-analysis. And so what a meta-analysis is it lumps together all the papers. And so it's an analysis of journal articles, right? So it doesn't actually look at the data, and it's sort of a very, I won't say blindly lumps things together, but it kind of just lumps them all together and says, okay, is there an effect? And if so, how big is the effect? And so, and the thing is, there's all sorts of methodological ways you can do this. And often what happens is that some papers are given more weight than others for reasons that are perhaps not necessarily legitimate. And also, often they don't look at and consider some of the finer details. So, for instance, there have been numerous papers on the effects of meditation for depression. There's been others that are meditation for stress, others for anxiety, for eating disorders, for all these different things. And it seems like for some conditions, meditation may be more effective than others, but they didn't really, they just sort of lumped everything together, I believe, in that. Maybe they broke things down, but I don't remember exactly. But generally speaking, yes, and that. And so I think the thing is, there's several layers to the answer. So, saying that it's no better than, say, exercise or an active control condition, I think the other way to think about it is that it's as good as. Like, we know that exercise is highly effective for regulating mood and for making people happier, less stressed, less depressed, less anxious. It's very, 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 very effective. And so to say that meditation is no better than that, is like, it's glass half full versus glass half empty. I mean, it's sort of saying, but it's as often as good as, and sometimes it's not as good as, but it's still, it's comparable to exercise or physical therapy, or talk therapy or something like this, or medications. So,
And there's actually, in both of those things, whether it's exercise or talk therapy, there could be overlapping dynamics that are similar to what's going on in meditation, right?
Right, exactly. But also, for instance, like I know one study, it was a really good study, and compared meditation to talk therapy to a do nothing control. And so both meditation and the talk therapy were better than the do nothing control, but the talk therapy was actually better for the primary outcome, which was, I think that was for pain, right? And so for pain, yes, talk therapy may be better than, but what was interesting was when they looked at follow-up, what they found is that, and actually even in the course of the 8 weeks, the meditation was better for depression. So, and even at long-term follow-up, that the meditation seemed to have a bigger impact on long-term depression than on the talk therapy. And so that's the sort of thing, it's like, so there may be the main outcome, but there's all the other stuff. And I think that other stuff is also important to keep in mind because, a lot of those studies are looking again at pathology and not at happiness and well-being. So often when you talk to people, they'll say like things like, yeah, the pain's still there, but it doesn't bother me so much anymore. Like, oh, the pain's still there, but it doesn't rule my life anymore. Right. Or the anxiety. Yeah. Or like, and that, and the questionnaires to get at these things are often a little bit crude. And how they ask things. And often when you talk to people, like subjectively, they will tell you that things are very, very different. So even though they may still be depressed, they may still be anxious, there's something else that's really changed. Like they just, and that's not really being captured, I think, often. So I think that's part of it. There's something else. So maybe, and it's hard to capture that something else. And that may or may not be legitimate because, whatever, but I think there is something there. And then, like I said, then the, compared to talk therapy and things like this, yes, it may be comparable, but is comparable. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. So, so I think, and that's the thing. And so to say, oh, it's not better than, also because most of them are not really powered for being better than. And if it's not quite as good as, it's definitely better than doing nothing. Mm-hmm. So I think the way they worded it was a bit misleading and overstating.
Got it. Your wheelhouse is really about how the brain is adapting to these practices. So for the word that refers to that as neuroplasticity, do you have a sort of a nutshell definition or explanation for what neuroplasticity is for beginners?
Right. It's just the brain changing and growing. And it happens 24/7, right? So your listeners listening to this, if you're going to remember anything that's you're watching, your brain's going to change in order to encode it, right? So your brain is constantly taking in information, and what it decides to keep into long-term memory, that's neuroplasticity. It's your brain's ability to change and respond to its environment.
Okay. And with the meditation, certain areas of the brain are getting thicker, getting stronger, getting bigger. Which areas have you identified? Right.
And this is actually a really important point because I'll answer that question second. Lots of times people say, like, oh, they think the entire brain is growing. It's not the case that the entire brain is growing. It's a few very discrete spots that are growing. And where it's changing, I think, is just as important as the fact that it's changing. So early on, a lot of people felt that, oh, when you meditate, you're sitting there and doing nothing. And so I think the initial finding that just the brain was different and was changing was important news because it's sort of like, no, meditation's not just sitting there lying there doing nothing. But then the more important question is the one that you asked, which is where is it changing? So there's a couple different brain regions. What we see in the course of MBSR, like in the course of 8 weeks, the number one thing that changed, the two big things that changed are the hippocampus, which is important for learning and memory, and a region called the PCC, which is important for sustained attention. And it's the area that goes in Alzheimer's disease. And of course, Alzheimer's disease is associated with, massive mind wandering, right? You can't stay in the present moment, or, you can't really fixate. So those are the two main regions. And then we also found a region called the TPJ, which is a brain region involved in empathy and compassion and being able to see things from multiple points of view. And then we also found the brainstem. And this is the area of the brainstem where a lot of neurotransmitters that are related to mood are released. And so we think that the changes there may be related to the changes in mood.
Mm-hmm. And in doing some research about you, it was I think I remember hearing you say that it's not just that certain areas are getting larger; some areas are actually getting smaller, specifically
Right.
the
The
amygdala.
amygdala.
Is that a fact? Is that true?
I wouldn't say it's getting smaller. I mean, sometimes I sort of say that. It's becoming less dense is the proper way to say it, which...
and the amygdala, just so for people that may not have
Right,
heard of it
is the
before.
fight or flight part of the brain.
Right.
So this is the area that's involved. It's related to stress. It's related to anxiety. And so, and the same area becomes more dense in animals when you stress them out. And so what it means to be less dense in animals, they can actually chop up the brains and look, and they can see that it's actually that so neurons look sort of like trees and that they have both extensive branches and extensive roots. And you can actually see that in the animals, they're actually growing more branches and roots. And so we think what's happening is that, some of those branches and roots are being pruned in the humans, but we don't know. We just don't have the tools to be able to look at that.
Okay. In preparation for this, you had sent me a few articles, more recent publications about some of the research that you're doing. One of the things was related to sort of age-related cognitive decline, brain decline.
Yeah.
And the other piece was had a curious title called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, which is known as MBSR. It's a specific 8-week mindfulness course. But mindfulness-based stress reduction, fear conditioning, and the uncinate fasciculus.
Yes.
Is that correctly? And at first I thought kind of getting into the age-related decline might be more interesting for listeners, but given the current political climate, maybe fear conditioning, because existentially we don't even know if we're going to have age-related problems anymore.
Yeah, seriously.
So I don't know, can we start with the fear conditioning one? What was going on with that study? Because I did read it a few times and found pretty tough sledding to get through.
Yeah, no, it's not an easy paper to talk about. Which is why there's no headlines about it. It's a bit of a fine point. So what that is, just what is fear conditioning? So classical fear conditioning is, what's fear conditioning in general? So this was Pavlov and, ring a bell and the dog salivate. And so this is really well studied, this idea that we learn to associate certain stimuli with certain responses. And in psychology, perhaps one of the best studied is something called fear conditioning. And what that is in animals, what they did was they would play a tone or shine a light, and then the animal would get a very gentle shock, right? But it was aversive. I mean, it was just like the equivalent for humans would be, imagine, those hand buzzers, you put in your hand and, they buzz you. Yeah. That's about the equivalent of the shock. So it's not like, electrocuting or anything like that. It's just a mild shock. But so then they learned that the light means they were going to get shocked, and they learned that very quickly. So
the neutral stimulus, the light and the buzzer, the shock get connected.
Right. And so then after a while, what we can do is you can shine the light and they respond even if they don't get shocked. Because initially you put them together, but then later on you just show the light and they still respond as if they're getting shocked, even though they're not getting shocked, because they learned that light means shock. And so you can condition them, but then there's also something called habituation, which is where then if you just keep showing the light, but you don't shock them, eventually they learn that, okay, the light is safe.
The light's safe, right.
But then when we bring them back the next day, the first time you shine the light, lots of times they'll still startle again, because, it's like, okay, they remember that it was at one point, meaning that they're going to get shocked. So, and that's done a lot in animals. And so they know a lot about the neurobiology of this in animals. And the two of the main regions involved in that are the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala is responding to the shock, but then the hippocampus is letting you learn that the shock is dangerous, or that the light is dangerous. And the light means you're going to get shocked. And there's data suggesting that the size and integrity of the hippocampus predicts how well you learn that and how well you retain it the next day. So that was what we were aiming to do, was to test whether, if we change people's amygdala and hippocampus, can we change their response to the shock, but also then, the next day when they get brought back. And we actually hypothesized that the bigger change is going to be on day 2 when they came back, that the meditators would, compared to the control group, the MBSR group compared to the control group, that the MBSR group would have, that they would be better, that they would remember it better, right? And that they would...
so there'd be less reaction to the neutral stimulation second day out.
Exactly. And so that was not the case. But what we did find, which was interesting, was that so from pre to post, the control group, they kind of sort of remembered, and they showed habituation. So they were sort of not really responding so much at post on the day one during the conditioning. Like, so they weren't really learning well, right? So they would see the light and they get shocked, but then they sort of knew, the game, right? And so they were sort of not responding so much. Whereas the meditators, they were still responding the way they did at pre. So one way to think about it is beginner's mind, right? So they were still learning the connection between the light and the shock, even though it was a different, like they had different setup and different lights than they had at pre.
I think there's a cartoon about that, isn't there? I mean, not to get off topic too much, but there's a cartoon about sort of someone surprising someone in a room, and different types of meditators are getting surprised in the room, and the yogi meditator who's absorbed in a state doesn't respond when someone comes in to surprise him because he's in an altered state of consciousness. And the Buddhist meditator who's always in the present moment is ever surprised anew because he's always there or always present.
Right. Oh, yeah, that's a nice one. Yes, that's exactly what the idea of it. So
okay.
Right. Yeah. And so then the uncinate fasciculus, what that is a fiber tract between the amygdala and the front of the brain. And that is well known to be involved in emotion regulation. And so it's well known that the front of the brain regulates the amygdala. And so what we found is that the uncinate fasciculus, and say that 5 times fast, uncinate fasciculus changed in the MBSR group compared to controls. And that change in the fiber tract correlated with this preservation of the startle at post. So that was a very long answer to your question.
Yeah.
But anyways, and so the idea is that basically, yes, so the beginner's mind is related to, a change in the connectivity between the amygdala and the front of the brain.
Okay. It doesn't sound like the outcome is as therapeutically advantageous as
one
might want.
Maybe not. Because the thing is, you want to make sure that you learn, right? And so, and again, we were a little bit of a head scratcher. And so, because you might say that, oh yeah, people are learning not to startle, right? But that's not the case. Because this whole point of this is to learn. It's about learning the relationship between the lights. Because in between the shocks of the lights, they also get shown other lights, that are not shocked to, and so it's a relationship between them. So they're paying attention and they're learning that this light means danger. And that's the thing. So, like, if you got mugged, right? Obviously you don't want to go down that street again, or you want to be careful about going down that street again, and only during the day or whatever. And so, but then you don't want to then be cavalier. Like, you want to have heightened maybe awareness, maybe in that general area, not just on that one space where you got mugged. You know what I'm saying? So that, or you might have more awareness in general about, so you don't want to become complacent. Like, you want to have about that. So that's sort of what we're
unconscious. Yeah.
Right. It's sort of just, it's remembering, it's keeping that in mind that, oh yes, I was mugged. And that it's not just about that one space where I was in one time that I was mugged. It's about, in general, that I may get mugged against. You want, and again, may not fear about it, but sort of, but the ability to learn.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So is there any hope for dealing with, Trump and things like Trump around this? Because, before November 8th, the word tweet didn't really elicit much reaction. Now I hear the word tweet, or I hear the phrase president-elect and things.
Yeah. So, so the data does not, I don't think it would be wise to extrapolate the data to anything even close to that.
Okay.
It's, I think, yeah. The data is very limited. I think it's
well, one of the things I wanted to get into with you was what do you think is getting evaluated in mindfulness-based stress reduction? Because mindfulness, this course, this approach to mindfulness that has been made famous by John Kabat-Zinn at UMass Medical Center, this is sort of the protocol that is being tested in most of the studies that I've seen.
Right.
And it's a certain kind of meditation. So how do you define the meditation process that is being evaluated in these studies? Like,
Right.
What are subjects told to do? Like,
Right. Well, it varies because some studies with imaging, they ask people to meditate in a scanner while they're doing a task. Like we did that in one of our studies with pain. Like we had people sit there and a painful shock was administered, and then just in order, and then do it again, but while meditating, right? And so that's one way of doing things. With the fear conditioning, we didn't tell them anything. But we didn't tell them to meditate in the scanner. We didn't tell them to use anything they learned from their classes in the scanner. We just said, okay, go on the scanner. And so maybe they used their meditation skills, maybe they didn't, maybe, but we were hoping to get just their natural, because again, like in real life, you don't go around telling people, people aren't thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to meditate now while I'm, talking to my boss, or while I'm driving, I'm going to be meditating. No, it's like, it's the effects of your practice. So that's what, at least in our lab, that's what we try very much to do for the most part, is people not meditating, but just people just responding as they normally do. So
to see if the capacity kicks in gear spontaneously, kind of? Exactly.
It's also, meditating in the scanner is pretty challenging. And so I wouldn't want it to be, because someone's, maybe they're able to meditate really well some days, but then, it gets confounded if you try to do both. Like you have both their ability right then and also the accumulation of all their experience that they've gotten since then. So that's our particular approach. And again, I think what most labs are doing is still pretty, maybe not rudimentary, but, they're still trying to find tests that reliably change and that are relevant to something that's interesting and useful. Because there's been a couple of tests where, the main one perhaps that's been most used is something called the ANT, which is the Attention Network Test.
Mm-hmm.
And what that is a bunch of little arrows, on 5 arrows in a row. And sometimes all 5 are in the same direction. Sometimes the middle arrow is in the opposite direction of the other 4. And then there's these little, a dot that sometimes it appears beforehand, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it appears, and sometimes it's in the middle of the screen, and sometimes it's above or below. And so sometimes the dot tells you where it's going to be. And so depending on how you do on those tests, so some people have found that, so there's 3 different types of attention. And supposedly this one task gets it all through these types of attention. But the problem has been that there's been a dozen studies and they've all found something different. So all of them have found a difference and a change, but sometimes they find it on alerting, sometimes it's on orienting, and sometimes it's on conflict monitoring. So so that's been very okay, how do we interpret that? And I don't think people have they just say, it's not a very good test, which is kind of sort of true. But so there's been other tests that have been perhaps a little bit more reliable, but nothing has really been tested as extensively, I'd say. So,
but in the interventions where you're showing that the hippocampus is getting thicker, denser, the PCC, the insula, these regions are getting thicker. The practices that the person is doing, it's
right,
mindfulness based.
Well, so we've only done it once so far, right? Okay. We just finished this, so we'll see. And so, right, and so it's and that's actually a very important point, is that it's not necessarily just the meditation, because there is the whole class. Mm-hmm. And also it's important to remember, because MBSR also includes yoga and a body scan, right? And so we don't know how much is formal sitting practice, how much is body scan, how much is yoga, and how much is the effect of being in the class itself. Because there is, evidence that just going to a class and being part of a class can have therapeutic effects. Mm-hmm. In fact, there was a study recently. They actually compared that. They ran 2 MBSR classes. That's actually MBCT, I believe, for depression. So the 2 classes were identical, except for one class got told to practice, one class didn't. And there was no difference in results. So that's a little bit, disheartening. But again, I don't know, and actually I haven't read that one. I just heard about it. So I need to sit down and actually read it. So, if there are any subjective differences or, anything like that. But, and maybe not. It's an interesting question, and so of what exactly is causing the changes. Like, I would like to think it's the meditation, but what exactly that means, it's hard to say. So we're getting there.
Not so sure.
Yeah.
I came across an article that you were one of the many authors on, looking at definitions around mindfulness, or something about
equanimity,
beyond mindfulness and equanimity, right?
Yeah.
And that, because as a teacher, I find that people do find meditation frustrating, challenging, and I think it gets into the kind of issue that you're getting at in that paper, that people find that they're judging themselves for noticing that they're judging things, or they're to use a phrase from this New York Times article, they actually internally moment shame themselves when they realize they're not in the moment. They feel like, oh, I'm a bad meditator, I'm not in the present moment. So, as a practitioner too, I have a few questions around like the definitions of mindfulness and how those definitions get operationalized in a practice.
Right.
And so first, I just want to get confirmation from you that, generally speaking, mindfulness means something like it's sort of a conscious attention to something that's occurring in the present moment.
Right.
Right. So
with equanimity.
That's the definition of mindfulness, or is that's a byproduct of development of mindfulness?
Well, so this is where it gets interesting. And so this is where I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of discussion between the Buddhist scholars and your viewership. So at least according to the early Pali texts, and my understanding, and I've talked to some Buddhist scholars, some Theravada Buddhist scholars. Sure. According to them, mindfulness cannot, when mindfulness arises, equanimity also arises. They co-arise. So if you're having a moment of true mindfulness, equanimity also arises. All right. And so, as well as, there's a bunch of other factors that all co-arise. It's there's the skillful and not skillful, the wholesome factors. So according to the early Buddhist texts, the wholesome factors co-arise. And so there's mindfulness, there's equanimity, and I forget the other ones. Moral disgust. I'm blanking on the other ones at the moment.
Yeah, I forget that list as well.
Yeah, but it's an important one. But the thing is, so often you have just early on in practice, you have just a moment of mindfulness, right? So you're saying something and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, and you see something in your subconscious, right? Or you see a thought pattern you never saw before. So there's that moment of mindfulness. And so that moment that you saw it, there was probably equanimity. But of course that moment, and it really is just a split moment, is then followed by the shame and the, oh my God, and the, how could I, right? And so then the mindfulness is gone and the equanimity is gone. And so that was sort of the point of the paper, is that often, mindfulness is getting develops, but the equanimity, and is not so strong yet. And so that there really needs to be emphasis from the teachers about the equanimity early on, and the self-acceptance and the non-judging, because it's really important that be recognized as an important part of practice. And often it gets overlooked for just be in the moment. It's like be in the moment with self-compassion, with equanimity, with understanding that, sort of understanding that you're going to see stuff that's not going to be pleasant, because you're going to see, your shadow self. Right.
And, usually the thing that people get judgy about in their practice is thinking.
Right.
Having thoughts, right? And so, I have this intuition around this or subjective experience around and thoughts around this, that while it's totally within reach to be aware of like a sound in real time. Mm-hmm. So I can hear a honking car outside and be aware that I'm hearing a honking car, or I can be reaching for a cup of tea and be aware that I'm reaching for a cup of tea. These sort of gross sensory experiences are easy to become aware of in real time. Thinking seems to be a different model.
Well, yes and no.
I mean, well, no. And I guess the thing I want to ask you about is being aware of the sound, like the honking car, doesn't change the behavior of the sound, right?
Right.
But as soon as I become aware of a process of thinking occurring, that has an operational influence on thoughts occurring, or how they behave, right?
Yes.
So, and it tends to interrupt them or stop them.
Yes.
Right. So,
which is cool. Yes.
Yeah. Well, generally it's cool, and maybe it produces kind of a therapeutic calmness or a sort of an appeasement of the agitation that the thoughts create. But it seems to me, it seems like there's this conflict of interest between allowing thoughts and being aware of thoughts.
Right. It's definitely a practice, but it can be done. Right? When you talk to yourself, right? Who's listening? That little voice is talking, but someone's listening. And so you can be, and so often, yes, like when you first start tuning in, that it does stop it, and you can use it to sort of stop it and get some calm. But I mean, with practice, you can also, think mindfully, right? And so to be aware of, really try to be on top of your thoughts as they're happening.
I guess that's the part that I'm questioning. I feel like it doesn't necessarily have the same quality of sort of steadfast presence, that it's more fluid and in and out than maybe sort of the steadfastness of listening to a sound go by or a car go by.
Not in my experience.
Okay. Right.
I mean, sometimes what you had to do, maybe open up attention a little bit, to allow, right. And that's just, so sometimes, you do then you get caught into them, and then, you forget to be mindful of them. But, so this is obviously nothing to do with science, right? So this is just my experience, right? Yeah. Which is, I find it useful to also try to, because oftentimes there's sort of emotions running through the background, and also what I'll call the little commentary voice that's underneath and behind the main voice. Like there's voices in my head, right? There's like, but there's like all this like subconscious or minimally conscious stuff going on. And that's for me what really happened when I really started to practice meditating and really became tuned into my mind, was that's what I really started noticing more and more of, was even when it's quote unquote quiet, when the voice stops, there's that little stuff in the background, right? And if you really start paying attention, you start seeing all that and hearing all that. And if you're not, and that's often when you do that, because often it starts off as just like a little comment, and then quiet, and then another little comment, and all of a sudden before you know it, it takes off, and that's your new thought. And so learn to notice them when they're just this tiny little in the background, for me, has been really interesting and fun and whatnot. And I don't know if that's what you're getting at or not.
Well, are those little thoughts you're noticing? Are they complete thoughts? Or are they just sort of fragmentary?
Sometimes they're just little, and sometimes it's just like a judgment, like oh, that person. And it's like, oh, I like that person. Why did I think? It's just like, or like again, it's like maybe like a value judgment or an emotion more than a thought per se, or like a little phrase or a fragment. Yeah. Often there's that stuff, and so again, that for me, that's what I've become aware of. Because the voice, the main commentary voice, that I can pretty much follow. Again, and maybe it doesn't maintain mindfulness the whole time, but I can follow that train. But then, right when it sort of stops, getting in tune with that little quieter stuff in the background, that's been more interesting for me.
Yeah, the question I have is whether like the awareness that's the sort of the cultivation and sensibility of awareness that one's developing in their meditation practice, does it need to be sort of firmly rooted in sort of the sensorial present moment experience, or can it be kind of retrospective and look back? Because I feel like when you become aware of your thinking, it usually is in kind of a rear view mirror hindsight type experience, where thoughts have gone on and then you become aware of those thoughts, and you notice them. Right.
And so that's fine. And if you're just allowing the train just to, and then you're just noticing, okay, thoughts are happening. So at some point though, like something juicy may pop up, and so you may decide to go and explore it. But then can you be mindful as you explore it? So what may be present is an old memory, right? And so like, oh yeah, I remember this time back when this happened. So my present moment experience is remembering the past. So can I bring mindfulness to my present moment experience of watching this old memory unfold, and how I'm thinking about this old memory and how I see things differently now, from when I did when the first experience first happened. So that's how I try to work with it.
Okay. Part of what's driving this question is I'm wondering if it's just even how realistic it is from a brain perspective to like the regions of the brain that are associated with the sort of heightened conscious awareness.
Right.
Are those at odds with the parts of the brain that generate thoughts?
Right. Well, and again, it depends on which consider a thought. If you're just talking about the voice being thoughts. But I mean, like, so imagine, like an artist painting, right? Or, doing something. I mean, those are thoughts too. They're not necessarily verbal thoughts, but, if you're shopping and you're figuring out how much money you have, I mean, that's sort of not necessarily, you don't necessarily say, okay, I've got $2, and, you sort of just do the math.
Right. There's not voices going on or
right,
sentences being articulated or anything. It's just,
and so all of that is cognition. And you can be aware of all of it. That's what's the really beauty of it. And that's sort of, and I know if people mostly do breath, they may have more difficulty with that. But frankly, I hated breath. And so my main practice is actually thought for a long time, mindfulness of mind. And so that's the thing. So as I became aware of it, those sorts of stuff is where I became more and more aware of. So, but the big question is, okay, so where is consciousness? Like, where is the, that which knows? That I have no clue where that is in the brain, right? And of course, a lot of people think that's not in the brain, but so who knows is the short answer, right? But, if there is some brain region that knows, then in theory, it could know just about anything that's happening in the brain, right? Because I mean, so thought is, you're like, if you want to call it the verbalization, right? That we know where that is, right? That's in the language center, right? And it doesn't matter if you're speaking or if you're just thinking those thoughts, the words are generated in language areas of the brain, right? Similar, like if you're a visual thinker, right, and you're imagining something in your mind's eye, like like the movie, right? We know that's visual cortex. They've shown really beautifully that people can close their eyes and they tell them to remember their room, and you can see, look, close your eyes and count the number of windows in your room. You can actually sort of see, things lighting up in the brain that looks like, spatially moving, people, moving through time, left to right, and it's all in visual cortex. And so it doesn't matter if you're imagining it or actually seeing it; it's the same part of the brain that's activated. So that should be, and that's all part of thinking, right? Is the visual part, the auditory part, the sensory part of it. So that which knows, wherever it may be, I guess whatever it could be aware of is whatever it could be aware of. And so we don't know. And so, it's more what it's able to access, though. That's what's sort of interesting. And so, how it does it, I don't know.
Yeah, well, that was my final question going to be where is it now? Where do you think? But
I guess it's divine. Yeah.
Do you actually entertain the idea that it's not necessarily located within the?
I don't. I'm a minimalist. A reductionist. I think it's all in the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, until you show me otherwise, I mean, I'm. If someone showed me irrefutable evidence that it's not there, I would be open to that, but everything I've seen suggests that it's in the brain. So, Well,
that's my intuition as well, but I'm not scientifically informed.
Yeah.
Well, it was really nice having you on. Thank you for your time. I do feel a little bit disappointed that I don't know how to deal with the Trump presidency quite yet.
Yeah. Did you see Lions Roar had it was the day after the election, and it asked a bunch of teachers to comment. And I think they were mostly commenting on the reaction to the election itself. And so it would be interesting to get their reactions now. That's been a couple of weeks. What all of them said, which I thought was really interesting, was go inside, because, and practice more. And so for me, and like what I really got from that set of comments was that, and one of the people put it really beautifully. It's like, there's this reaction right now. I mean, we're reactionary, right? Like we want to fix things. We want to solve things. We want to figure out how to do things. And right now we have a lot of fear and a lot of anger because our candidate didn't win, and a lot of fear. And so we're tending to act out of fear. And so we really need to practice hard to make sure that when we do act, that we're acting out of love and compassion and understanding and not out of fear. So I think that for me was a big, huge take-home message of, okay, practice more, become aware of the fear that we're feeling right now, become aware of all the negative emotions we have about Trump, and we really got to process them, big time.
Yeah.
So
and I've seen some backlash against that, saying that it's not the fear is not something that it's necessarily there's something wrong with us for having. It's a very, very valid response.
Definitely. But we should not act from fear. So the Buddha says is if we act out of fear, we'll probably regret our actions later, and it probably will not be skillful. So we really have to be acting out of, I mean, that's not to say we just sit there and we just meditate and we don't do anything, but we need to make sure that anything that we do is not out of fear and anger. And it's really out of a place of of deep understanding. So I think that was the take home message I got from those.
Okay.
So that's not really an answer, but it's, practice.
We can add the link to that, to the Lion's Roar piece.
Yeah.
In the notes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
All right. Talk to you later.
Talk to you.